In case my friends are watching, hello. I hope you're not started yet, but perhaps we could stand and begin with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created.
And thou shalt renew the face of the earth.
Let us pray. O God, whom you have instructed the hearts of your faithful by the brilliant light of the Holy Spirit, grant, we beseech you, a taste for the true, a love for the good, and may we always seek our consolation in him. And this we ask of you through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Our Lady, Queen of the Holy Apostles,
Pray for us.
Our Lady, Queen of all life,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph, the protector of all life,
Pray for us.
Saint John Vianney,
Pray for us.
Father Menard.
Intercede for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Vicky, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for making time in your very full schedule to be with us these evenings and to help us better navigate through the secular arena. Well, many of us will be serving as priests, as religious, and some laymen and women as well, and how to dialogue with the contemporary culture or anti-culture concerning this most important moral matter. And I would like to invite Dr. Rhonda to say a few words of introduction.
I'm so happy that Kiki Latimer is here tonight and this week. And first of all, I must tell you, we have a little handout in the back of the topics for each of the days. And if you can come to any of them, that's wonderful. And there's also a handout with a little summary of the whole book. So Kiki Latimer is with Professor Stephen Schwartz, the author of this terrific book called Understanding Abortion from Mixed Feelings to Rational Thought. And what's unusual, all of you here have read books about why abortion is wrong, but what's unusual about this book is that it actually presents both sides, but of course, the side of pro-life is much stronger, but it presents both sides in such a way that people who are really ambivalent about abortion really can't figure out if it's right or wrong, especially in certain circumstances like rape and, all the incest and all that kind of thing. They can read the book without feeling that it's a caricature of the pro-choice position. And so by teaching this in this way, Dr. Schwartz and Kiki Latimer, who teach at University of Rhode Island, which is not a religious school, by teaching it in this way, they get the majority of their students come out of that class after reading this book. They come out of that class pro-life. So this is reaching into a whole area that many of us have just given up on. And so it's a terrific book. And she's going to go through the main points in this book during the next 5 days. Kiki is a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a pro-life activist, but also what I didn't know is she's the author of beautiful, beautiful books for children that are there on the back table, and take a look at them. They're just marvelous books. And some of them are about the project of her parish, where they actually built a whole village in Haiti by collecting money over the years, and those are delightful books. So take a look at the books as you come out later, and you can, these books are for sale as well. So, so I give you Kiki.
I just thank you so much. This is being here tonight is an answer to many years of prayer, and hopefully a start of going on to other seminaries in the country and presenting this program. We've got about 10 hours this week of time, hopefully a little bit more than that. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. Let me just prepare you ahead of time. Tonight, the plan is that I'll speak for about an hour, and then we'll take about a 5-minute break, and then I'll speak for another hour, and hopefully you can save your questions. Unless they're short, quick questions, save longer questions for the end, and maybe write down the slide number if there's something specific that you want to ask about where we need to refer back to it. The plan for the week is tonight I will present, and there's a method to my madness, so you're going to have to trust me over these 5 days. Our talk tonight is going to be mainly the pro-choice moral side of the issue. There's the moral and the legal, and the hope always is that the legal is rooted in the moral. Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But tonight we're going to dig into the mindset of the pro-choice moral position. Now, the last time Dr. Schwartz and I presented this at a religious institution, and we started with the pro-choice. I usually do the pro-choice side, and he does pro-life, and we've kind of done it as a team for about 20 years now, but he's now retired. But the last time I did this at a religious institution, they threw me out after the first day, and were absolutely convinced that I was pro-choice. So I'm hoping you don't throw me out tonight, that you'll bear with me. They did eventually let me come back the next day after calling Steve and checking things out. But what I want to be able to present to you is how pro-choice thinks, so that by the time you are done here at the end of the week, you should know how to be pro-choice as well as you know how to be pro-life, and hopefully you'll know how to be pro-life even stronger. Because when you get out there, and if you have to, as a bishop, speak to the media, or as a priest, speak to parishioners, you really need to understand the other side. And if you don't, you're going to be put right into a corner. And we've seen that over and over again in this country. You know, Luke told us the children of this world are smarter, cleverer, wiser than the children of light. The children of this world are smarter, clever, sharper, sneakier than the children of light. And it's time we realized that and got smarter, cleverer, wiser than the children of this world. And that's what I'm really, really hoping to do for you in this 10 hours in 5 days. So just bear with me, because I'm going to take you on a roller coaster ride. So tomorrow night, we're going to look at the pro-life moral side. And then the third thing is going to really be a dialogue between pro-life and pro-choice, where we ask both of them some serious questions, like what does it mean to be a person? Do I have a right to my body? When does life begin? And we're going to really have them both answer those questions so that you can understand how pro-choice answers those questions. But sometimes we don't even know how pro-life answers some of those questions. Okay, so we want to look at that. And then on the fourth night, we're going to go into the legal question, how it stands right at the moment in the United States, the pro-choice legal side, and the pro-life legal side. We're going to look at that. I'm going to finish up a little bit of the legal on the last night. And then we're going to go into some personal stories, because for 20 years, I was executive director of a woman-to-woman pregnancy agency. And so I'd like to share some stories of abortion in the real world and unwanted pregnancies in the real world. And I have a lot of experience with that, and I'll share some of that as we go through. So that's sort of the plan for the week, and there's a list of that plan at the back. The course really is like a whole thing. So I really urge you, if you can't be here every night, it's going to be online. Look at what you've missed, because it builds. And if you just get bits and pieces, you're going to say this is kind of crazy. It's a roller coaster ride that you want to get all of from beginning to end. Okay, so that's the plan. So I want to start with Maggie's story. One of the last semesters that Steve and I worked at the University of Rhode Island, and we presented this issue was presented as part of an ethics class. And it was always at the end of the ethics class, because there's a lot of ethics that need to come into play, which I'll give you bits and pieces of before we get into the abortion course with students at a secular university. So it's a very difficult topic to enter into. But at the end of presenting the abortion course, this young woman came to the office one afternoon. And she knocked on the door and she stuck her head in and she said, "Could I talk to Kiki?" And said, "Sure, come on in." And then she looked over at Steve and she said, "Can he leave?" And since we had just finished the abortion topic, Steve knew enough to immediately jump up and leave. He just hightailed it out of there as fast as he could. And this young woman sat down and she said, "I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but I want to talk to you." She said, "Because at the beginning of the semester, I had an abortion." And she said, "And I want you to understand that in my situation, it was the right thing to do." And I have to tell you, when we teach the course, neither Steve nor I ever tell anyone whether we're pro-life or pro-choice. We've been accused of being too pro-life. We've been accused of being too pro-choice by various students. So she had no idea where I stood. And she said, "I want you to understand that in my situation, it was the right thing to do." And I sat there and I nodded and I said, "I understand." And she said, "I was brought up Catholic." She said, "I'm a good Catholic girl. I was always pro-life. But then I came to realize I got myself into this situation. And I came to realize that in my situation, abortion was the right thing to do." And I said, "I understand." And she said, my mom always told me, if you get pregnant, like, don't ever marry the guy just because you're pregnant, like I did. Don't make that mistake." And she said, so I didn't want, my mom told me, my good Catholic mother told me, don't make that mistake. And I didn't want to make the same mistake my mother made. So I came to realize that in my situation, abortion was the right thing to do. And again, I just looked at her and I said, "I understand." And she said, "This man, he wanted to marry me, but I just knew from the beginning, he just wasn't the right one. He wasn't the one. You know, he wasn't the knight on shining armor. I really liked him a lot. I loved him in some ways, but he just wasn't the one." And so now I was pregnant. And so I couldn't marry him. And so you see, in my situation, this was the right thing to do. And again, I just nodded. And I said, "I understand." And she said, "I'd just gotten back to college." She said, "And I'm in a medical profession. I'm going to make a difference in people's lives." She said, I'm in a profession where I can change the world. I can make a difference. And now I was pregnant, and I would lose that. I would lose that opportunity to make a difference in the world. So you see, Kiki, that in this situation, even though I'd always been pro-life, abortion was the right thing to do. And I just nodded, and I said, "I understand." And then there was silence, complete silence. You know how sometimes we just want to fill silence, don't we? We just want to fill the silence. But I said, no, I'm not going to fill the silence. I just let the silence descend. And it was silent. And it was so silent that it was like that moment in the beginning creation when the Holy Spirit comes over the face of the earth. It was so silent. And I prayed, what does this young woman want from me? Why is she here? Why is she here telling me that it was the right thing to do? Why did she come to me? And the silence stayed. And then finally she said, "I still speak to him every day." And you know, I wasn't sure whether she meant the boyfriend or God, because she talked quite a bit about her relationship with God, and that that was important to her. And she hadn't been back to Mass since the abortion, but God was important. And so she talked about this relationship with God and this relationship with the boyfriend. And she said, I still talk to him every day. And I said, I wasn't sure which one she meant. And I said, him? And she said, oh, the baby. She said, I knew from the very beginning it was a little boy. And I said, I understand. And then I said to her, what do you say to him? And she said, I tell him I'm his mommy. I tell him that I love him. I tell him that I'm sorry. And I said, I understand. And then she looked at me, and carrying more pain than any 22-year-old young woman should ever have to carry, she said, nobody told me I would feel like this. How long will I feel like this? And whether you're pro-choice or you're pro-life, that story should horrify you. Because if you're pro-choice, something went horribly wrong here. Because this young woman made a choice she couldn't live with. And if you're pro-life, this story should doubly horrify you. Because not only did this beautiful young woman, this beautiful young Catholic woman, make a horrible choice that she couldn't live with, but she also lost this beautiful child, and this child lost its life. This was a beautiful young Catholic woman who went to church, who was pro-life. What the hell went wrong here? Because something went wrong. And I will tell you what went wrong. This young woman had gut feelings against abortion. And she had heart feelings against abortion. And she had religious feelings against abortion. But she didn't have rational thought. And when push comes to shove, if you don't have rational thought, feelings just don't carry the day. I mean, we all know, think about times in your life when you made a decision based solely on feelings. Solely on feelings. Not that feelings don't have a place. Not that the heart doesn't have a place. But divorced from rational thought, feelings are a nightmare that lead us to make terrible, terrible decisions. And so that's why the book is called, the subtitle of the book, Understanding Abortion, From Mixed Feelings to Rational Thought, because the mixed feelings just aren't enough to carry the day. There's got to be rational thought. And so that's what over the next few days I really hope to offer you, to see the big picture. If you think that the pro-choice side is some kind of mambly-pambly stuff, you are wrong. You are wrong, because that's why they're winning the war. At times, most of the time for the last 40 years in this country. It is not mambly-pambly. It is strong. It is clever. The children of this world are more clever, more wise, more shrewd than the children of light. And so we need to beef up, and I'm really happy you're here. So let's move on with this. So I just want to bring in the idea of the truth question, because everywhere you go, there's, as we know, there's this idea of true for me. Not how it really is, just this idea of true for me. And so you really, when you speak about the abortion question, or any controversial question, you really want to get people to say, but how is it really? How is it really? And in the abortion question, we have the moral question and the legal question, which leaves us with 4 possibilities. It could be morally right, and we legally allow abortion, which is a consistent position. That it could be morally right, and we legally forbid it. It can be morally wrong, and we legally allow it, or morally wrong, and we legally forbid it, the last one being consistent. So these are the possibilities. So I just want to talk briefly about the terms that I'm going to use as we go along. Pro-life wants the being in the womb called a baby. And we all know pro-choice wants the being in the womb called an embryo or a fetus. And what I'm going to do for the sake of the argument, we're also going to use the term the being in the womb. So when I argue from the pro-choice side, and I want you to understand how they think, I'm going to use the word fetus, because that's how they want to be represented. And when I argue for the pro-life side, and where the pro-life hat, I'm going to use the term baby. When I'm in between the two and I'm discussing the two, you're going to hear me use the term the being in the womb. The being in the womb, which we use quite a bit in the book, which keeps both sides happy. It's a kind of a neutral term. So just kind of keep that in mind when you hear that term. So I want to make a moral distinction before we even get started on the issue itself. In case there's any questions, the moral distinction between good and right and evil and wrong. Actions are right or wrong. I know it's probably seminarian 101 here, but I just want to make sure that for everyone, especially people long distance learning, that actions are right or wrong, persons are good or evil. A person can do right and be good. For instance, that's a pretty obvious one. I give you a gift because I love you. The action is basically right, and I am good for doing it. But a person can do right and be evil. I can give you a gift simply to make somebody else jealous. Or I talk you into doing something that you mistakenly believe is immoral. So there's this example when a person can do right but be evil. Person can do wrong and be good. For instance, a doctor in the 1400s does the wrong procedure. Or I am lied to and I do X believing it is Y. So you can do wrong and still be good, do wrong accidentally. And of course, a person can do wrong and be evil. A man mugs and shoots you to steal your wallet just for the sake of frightening you. So if abortion is right, a woman or the abortionist can either be good or evil. And if abortion is wrong, the woman or the abortionist could either be good or evil. This course, I want to make this perfectly clear, intends to look at the action of abortion as right and not judge the persons involved as good or evil. So I just want to make that we're looking at the action of abortion. And whether the person, the young woman who goes there frightened and scared and told that this is the blob of tissue, whether that's a sinful action, it's certainly a wrong action, but whether it's evil on her part is, I'm going to leave between her and God and her confessor. And the same with many well-meaning people, not all of them, but many well-meaning people in the abortion industry. Whether they're deliberately doing evil and know they're doing evil or not is, I'm going to leave that out of the equation. We're going to be looking strictly at the action of abortion itself and not the persons involved. So there's a couple of things, believe it or not, the pro-life and pro-choice actually agree on. And the first is that the being in the womb, whatever it is alive and growing. Nobody questions that. Nobody. Okay, so this thing, whatever it is, if it's a baby, if it's a fetus, if it's a plant, if it's a blob of cells, whatever it is, nobody questions it's alive and it's growing. And also, neither pro-choice nor pro-life, believe it or not, believe it is part of the woman's body. Everyone knows it is not part of the woman's body. Now, it may be considered a tumor or a blob of some sort, but everybody knows it has its own genetic code, has its own blood system, that its blood system does not interact with the blood system of the woman. So everyone knows and agrees on both sides, anybody with any kind of intelligence whatsoever, that it is not part of the woman's body. Now that it is in the woman's body, that's another thing. But it is not part of her body. Obviously, if it's a male child and she's female, you've got a problem there right away that this thing is male and not female. So nobody questions whether it's part of the woman's body. So there's core points here I want to point out here. Pro-choice, the main pro-choice idea is that the being in the womb generally is not a person. It's only a biological organism. It has no right to life. Okay, so the being in the womb is not a person. And then the second core point is, even if it happens to be a person, even if it is a person, the woman has no duty to sustain it. Okay, so those are your two main points that everything else is going to rely on. It's either not a person, it's a biological thing of growing and alive, but not a person. And if it happens to be a person, well, whatever it is, person or not a person, there's no duty to sustain this thing. And all pro-choice people absolutely say the government should protect the right of a woman to choose abortion. So keep in mind that immediately, the government has to be involved there to protect the right of a woman to choose abortion. Pro-life core points is the being in the womb is a person. It's a small baby, small scale person. That same person it will be throughout its life. Abortion kills a small innocent child, a living person, usually through horribly painful means. And again, pro-life says the government should protect the right of the child to live. So you look here, we've got the government, the government. The government cannot be neutral. And notice that both sides claim that. Both sides want government protection. Both sides appeal. So often you hear politicians especially saying, oh, government can stay out of it, right? Government can stay out of it. The government cannot stay out of it. And neither side wants the government to stay out of it. So keep that in mind. Neither side wants the government to stay out of it. Both of them appeal to government protection. One for the woman's right to choose and the other for the right of the child to live. So we're trying to find truth here. And so I want you to really be open to looking at how pro-choice thinks, as well as how pro-life thinks and how they interact. And the idea is to aim for truth. If pro-choice is really correct and true, I should believe that. If pro-life is really correct and true, then I should believe that. We don't want anyone to fall into ever this idea of true for me. You always want to get people away from the idea of true for me. Well, abortions, I personally would never have an abortion, but that's what's true for me. But you should do, well, what's the truth? What's the truth? You really want to always bring the abortion issue down to what is the truth? What is the truth of the matter? And if all morality is relative, there's nothing to discuss in any moral matter, whether it be abortion, child abuse, killing, rape. If it's all just a matter of what you or your culture happen to believe at a given point in history, there's really nothing to discuss. And sometimes it's important to bring up other issues like these to say, is there a real truth in child abuse? Well, most people will say absolutely, that there's a real truth in child abuse. So keep that in mind when people say, well, that's true for you, but it's not true for me. Is slavery right or wrong, regardless of what our culture says or what one believes? Or was slavery wrong even when the culture thought it was right? Sometimes with a controversial issue, people are tempted to say, well, there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. It's a controversial issue. It'll always be a controversial issue. But it's really important to point back to the time when this country thought slavery was fine. And then they thought, well, maybe it's not so fine, and it became a real controversial issue. Well, even when it was a controversial issue, it was wrong. It was still wrong, even though it was controversial. So even when most of the culture thought that slavery was right, it was still wrong. It was still wrong. And so you can find an answer, in abortion eventually as well. So even though the whole culture and the Supreme Court said abortion is fine, well, maybe it's not. And it's hardly a settled issue. It's hardly a settled issue at all in this country. So objective morality tells us a whole culture can be mistaken. And slavery is our example of it right here at home. The whole culture was mistaken. And that can happen again. The other thing to point out is only with objective morality can progress be made. Only with objective morality can progress be made. Otherwise, you just say things are different. You know, back in the 1800s, we had slavery, now we don't. Is that moral progress? Well, relativism has to say, no, that's not moral progress. Things are just different. Things are just different now. But nobody wants to say that. I mean, nobody wants to say that. People want to say it's not different. We have moral progress. We figured out the truth. We figured out the truth. So you can only have that with objective morality. So you want to, that's the steering point away from this idea of, well, it's true for me or it's true for you. I just want to briefly mention Gert's rules. Anyone here familiar with Gert's rules? Gert's rules are wonderful because generally people sort of say with all the multiculturalism we have, well, all cultures are different. All cultures are different. I mean, how many of you heard all cultures are different, right? But they're not. They're not. Because to start with, you can't have a culture unless you have Gert's rules. I love Gert's rules. They're just simple. Do not kill, do not cause pain, do not disable, do not deprive of freedom, pleasure, do not deceive, do not cheat, keep your promises, obey the law, and do your duty. Without these 10 things, you cannot have a culture. You can't have a culture. If you don't have these 10 things, all you can do is sit in your cave with your bat and ward everybody else off and try to survive. You can't get together and create music and write books and have lectures if these 10 things aren't going on around you. All you can do is sort of huddle in your cave and defend yourself. So these are essential for culture to take place. They're the basis of culture. So as I have here at the bottom, surprisingly, people usually think of the Nazis or the mafia, and they say, well, they don't obey these things. Oh, yes, they do. Within their own culture, they absolutely obey all of these things. Hitler did not want to be killed. He did not want anybody to cause him pain. He didn't want to be lied to or cheated. Any promises made to Hitler he wanted kept. And the same goes within the mafia or any other organization. You cannot have an organization, a cultural society of any sort without these things. They're always there in the background. Now, these are just for a society to exist. He has also a list of what he calls the ideals for a society to flourish. If you just have these, you can exist, but you can't flourish. Flourishing is going to need things like gratitude and love and all of those kind of things. But you need this just to exist. And they're good to kind of keep in mind as the background to the abortion issue. This is the big one, and this is the one I'd like to tattoo on everyone before I leave. Surprisingly, abortion is not a religious issue. That may really surprise you. Abortion is not a religious issue. And to the extent that the children of this world get us to call it a religious issue, they will win this war in a pluralistic society. The reality is first of all, there are people of all faiths and no faiths, believers, agnostics, the whole stand on both sides of the issue. That's to start with, and a good example is atheist Nat Hentoff. He's very pro-life, civil libertarian, free speech, anti-death penalty, and he's anti-abortion. But he's an atheist, and maybe you're surprised because maybe you've always thought of abortion as a religious issue. Why would an atheist be against abortion? Because Nat says, this is it. This is all we have. You get life and then you're dead and you're done and it's over with. So, but life is amazing. Life is amazing, he says. He says, I love being alive. What a gift. I don't know where he thinks a gift comes from, but what a gift. But what a gift. Like, what a thing to have. Consciousness, life, fields, flowers, friends, people. Like, who would take that away from somebody? He's horrified that that's all you get is this life. Who would ever take that away from somebody? He's extremely pro-life, extremely pro-life. And then, of course, we have Catholic Francis Kissling. Catholic, Frances Kissling, who is very pro-choice. She's the president and founder of Catholics for a Free Choice. It's very interesting. I had the opportunity to meet her at the Princeton Life and Choice Conference in 2010. And we had a wonderful exchange where, you know, she insisted that a woman had a right to her body, that this was sacred territory. And as just kind of a sneak preview ahead, I said, you know, that's very, very interesting. But the problem is, like, when did you get your body? I said to her, I asked her, we had a forum where you could ask, when did you get your body? I said, a woman absolutely has a right to her body, but when did you get your body? I said, the problem here is I got mine at conception. Now, I don't know how many of you know Frances Kissling or have seen her. She's a very tough lady. And she's a tough cookie. Yeah. You know, you don't want to like get in her path. She's a strong woman. And she's obviously, as a Catholic, has strong opinions. And when I asked her that question, it was very, very interesting because this was her response. And 400 people at the Princeton Life and Choice Conference were in shock because her response was, she began to cry. And she said, I wish my mother had aborted me. So it kind of, when you start to get into the mindset, you start to see that you can learn things that you never expect to see happen. And it was a very painful moment. It was a very painful moment. But here she is, again, someone of some kind of faith, as a Catholic, very pro-choice all the way through. So what I want to stress more than anything is that abortion, just like slavery, is a human rights issue. It is a human rights issue. It is a civil rights issue. And if you make it a religious issue in a pluralistic society, you have every right, you're going to hear, keep your rosaries off my ovaries. And rightly so. And rightly so. Because you're more than welcome to be Catholic. But I'm the atheist down the street, or the Jew down the street, or the Muslim down the street. And you can have your Catholic beliefs, but this is a pluralistic society. This is a pluralistic society. And they're absolutely right. If it's just a religious thing, if it's our little religious thing, then we have to keep it to ourselves. So when you are talking about abortion, the very first thing as religious men and women that you need to make clear is, while I happen to be a religious person, this is not a religious issue, and my arguments are not religious. There is not one religious argument in this book anywhere. And teaching this issue at the University of Rhode Island, a secular university, the name of God is never mentioned. It is a civil rights issue. It is a human rights issue. And the first thing out of your mouth needs to be that. I happen to be a religious person, but my arguments are not religious. I don't need to know God to know I shouldn't shoot you. Most atheists know that they can't go around shooting people or stealing or, run down the list of Gert's rules, cause you pain, imprison you for no reason. You don't need God to know that. And you don't need God to know any of the stuff that pro-life holds. It is not a religious issue. And we as religious people need to over and over again make that clear to the world. Because let me tell you, the children of this world are smarter, cleverer, wiser, sneakier than the children of light. And they would like nothing more than to say, oh, this is just a religious issue. And once it's a religious issue, keep your rosaries off my ovaries. Keep your religious stuff to yourself. You don't want abortion? Don't have one. You don't want to own a slave? Don't own a slave. Oh, wait a minute. You don't want to own a slave? Don't own a slave. Wait a minute. See, the slavery issue, there were religious people, mostly religious people, that fought against slavery. But we knew back then it wasn't a religious issue, it was a human rights issue. Nobody back then was saying, hey, if you don't want a slave, don't own one. That argument never came up. But it comes up all the time with abortion. You don't want an abortion, don't have one. You don't believe in abortion, fine. Go to church and don't believe in abortion. I don't care, but don't push your religious views on me. See, that never came up with slavery. But they have beautifully had that come up with abortion. And you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of that. Abortion is not a religious issue. Do you want to stop there for questions? You want a question? This is like, I'm going to bring this up over and over again, but it's so important.
You say it's not a religious issue, but then again, God has instilled the natural law within our hearts. So how would you argue to an atheist that says, well, it's just my gut feeling? That I shouldn't.
That's fine with me if it's his gut feeling. I hope it's his gut feeling. Where that natural law came from, we don't need to say. That everybody has a basic understanding that I shouldn't kill my neighbor, I shouldn't go around shooting people. That it came from God, you can believe that. And I happen to believe that. But you don't need to believe where it came from. You know, the fact that everybody has a lollipop you don't need to know where the lollipop came from. Just be glad everybody's got a lollipop. So, you know, the atheist may say, well, I didn't get natural law from God. It was, came through evolution. It came through, the tooth fairy. It came, that's just how human beings have come about. That's nice. That's good. That's good. They're not going to say it came from God. You happen to believe it came from God. That's nice. But you don't need that. You don't need that. Just be glad that they basically understand natural law, that we all basically understand. Natural law is like Gert's rules. We all basically understand Gert's rules. You don't need to invoke God. You can invoke natural law, but natural law could come from anywhere. So you don't need God. You happen to believe that, and that's great. In a pluralistic society, that's great. But if you say it's all about God, why should the atheists in a free country like ours have to buy into that? And they're going to say, rightly so. I don't buy that. It just becomes it just doesn't work in a pluralistic society. Does that make sense? Does that help? Yes.
Well, you got Gert's rules up there, but how do atheists respond to those rules? I mean,
They live
they
with those
don't
rules.
they don't question those rules?
No, I don't think anyone questions those rules. I mean, do you see atheists running around shooting people? Do you see atheists running around stealing from other people? I mean, atheists function in society just like the rest of us do on the Gert's rules part, or they're put in prison. See, if you do anything against Gert's rules, you go to prison. So, I mean, your basic people, whether they believe in God or not, little children understand Gert's rules. They don't have to believe in God. Little children understand Gert's rules.
But as you know, there are societies that don't follow those rules. I mean, cannibals in Irian Jaya, here in Indonesia. I mean, they're cannibals. They kill each other.
The applications of the rules will differ, but the basic, you can't eat anybody anytime for any reason. Okay? You may be able to throw a virgin into the volcano to stop the rain, or to start the rain, or to stop the rain. But you can't throw a virgin into the volcano whenever you feel like it. There's applications of the rules. There's no society that you will ever find anywhere that says you can kill anybody, anytime, anywhere, whenever you feel like it. Or you can steal anytime you feel like it. There's always rules for the rules, but there can't be a society without the rules. So yes, the applications of the rules, when you can kill and when you can't kill, will differ. But even in a cannibalistic society, you can't eat everybody. See, you can't eat everybody. Everybody can't eat everybody. You're just going to have one fat person left, So there's rules. Right, so there's rules even in cannibalism.
Yeah.
You can't, it's not like a free-for-all. Yeah. So even there, you've got natural law going on. The Gert's rules apply. So, all I need to is, write this on your hearts. It is not a religious issue. Because the minute you get that, if you're ever, having an interview with the media, and immediately they're going to say, well, that's nice that you believe that. But you're a religious person. The rest of the country isn't Catholic. Who are you to impose your Catholic views on the rest of the world? And they're absolutely right to say that. Except you want to say, well, these aren't Catholic views. These are human rights views. These are human rights views, just like slavery was a human rights view. Were Catholics against slavery? Yeah, Catholics were against slavery, but that didn't make it a Catholic issue. That didn't make it a religious issue. It's a human rights issue. It's a human rights issue. And that needs to be the first thing out of your mouth. Because once it's put into a religious issue, it's a free-for-all in a pluralistic society. So I want to clarify some terms here. Both sides, pro-life and pro-choice, understand that the being in the womb is a human being. And it's biologically human. Nobody doubts that for a minute. Everybody knows it's not a chicken. It's not a cat. It's a human being. There's no question about that. It's got 46 chromosomes. It's got the DNA of Homo sapien. But it is physical only. On the pro-choice side, it is a physical thing. It is a physical thing. There's no soul. There's no spirit. There's no person there. And so it is morally not relevant. Now, on the other hand, we've got the term human person. And the idea here is that there's a spirit, a soul, a mind. There's a being that is present in the living human body at some point in time. Some point in time. Okay, and that we're going to discuss at what point in time. And obviously, pro-choice differs as to what point in time. Pro-life generally says at conception, but not all pro-life people say at conception. But most do. Most pro-lifers say this is a conception. Pro-choice says this enters at some other point in time. And the bottom line is person is what counts when you're talking about a moral issue. And the Supreme Court made that very clear in Roe v. Wade. Person is what counts when discussing morality, moral issues. And it's interesting because only in this issue, as far as I know, has this distinction ever been made, but there's no getting away from it. Before the abortion issue, the assumption was if you were a human being, you were a human person. If you were a human person, you were a human being. These two terms were interchangeable. That is not the case anymore. Since Roe v. Wade, that is not the case. And you can't just shuffle these things around and say, it's a human being. Because pro-choice is going to say, well, of course it's a human being. I don't doubt that it's a human being. The question is, at least for some pro-choice people, is it a human person? Is it a human person? And so it's absolutely clear to be distinct with these two. If you say human being, and if I use the term human being during this course, I'm talking biologically human. But person is going to be the question that comes up. Is it a person? Now, pro-life, I'm going to use the term pro-life. That's the name this group chooses for itself. So I'm not going to use anti-choice, anti-woman, there's now called pro-birth or forced birthers. I'm going to consider those terms as inflammatory against pro-life. But at the same time, pro-choice is the name this group chooses for itself. Not going to call them pro-death, anti-child, or anti-family. I'm going to consider those as inflammatory. It's interesting that just recently I've seen pro-birthers used by pro-life people. So it's interesting that's a term that's now being used on both sides to say that people that are pro-life don't care about women and children after birth. That we just want to get that baby born, but then we won't support programs that feed children, that help women get support for housing, clothing, etc. So we're starting to see that term slip in on the other side. So it's kind of fascinating. Towards the end, when we talk about, towards the end, we'll start to talk about how the political scene is changing, how the moral scene is changing, and it is changing. Okay. So let's start now, finally, after all that introduction, with the pro-choice moral. And the very first person I want to talk about is Susan Sherwin. She wrote Abortion Through a Feminist Ethics Lens. She's from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And her main thing is abortion is sometimes the best option. It's the best option. And only the woman herself can make this intimate decision. Pregnancy is a profound event for a woman with profound effects for her life. and therefore she must make the choice to keep or terminate a pregnancy. It's her life and her decision. It's her life. Like, who are you to tell this woman what's going to happen with her life? I mean, her very life is going on here. She has plans. Maybe she has other children. Maybe she has educational plans. Who are you to say what she should do? Who are you to make that decision for another human being? That is private. That is private. I mean, it doesn't get any more private than pregnancy. And especially you as a man, but even you as a woman, but certainly you as a man. Who are you to ever suggest that you could be involved in that decision of the most private, profound thing that ever happens to a woman? Having a child that you have to take care of for years. You can just walk away. You can just walk away. If she walks away, if she places that child for adoption, that is painful. That is painful. So who are you, the Supreme Court said, to get into such a deeply private place of a person's life as their womb and what goes on there and what she does with that thing that's growing there? That is for a woman to decide. She and only she can make that intimate decision. That's personal. That's sacred. You can't just tromp in there and make that decision for her. What abortion destroys has no absolute value aside from her and how she sees it. The being in the womb has, or fetus, or a baby, you want to call it a baby? Go ahead, call it a baby. It has value only if she deems it valuable. She's the one who this is going to affect forever. Forever. Don't try to get into that space. You don't belong there. Even if you're her husband, you can walk. And the Supreme Court said, that's right, even if you're her husband, you have no say in the matter. You have no say if your wife wants to get an abortion because this is her decision, her intimate, sacred place. You can't go there. Don't even think about it. The fetus, the being in the womb, if you want to call it a baby, fine, call it a baby. But it has value only if she says it has value. Because look at where it is. It's inside her. It's inside her. And you want to step into that sacred space and tell her what to do? I don't think so. I don't think so. Can you imagine somebody telling you that some part of you, you get to decide whether it goes or it stays? No, it's inside her. It's intimate. It's private. Private. Only the woman herself could possibly make this decision. Could possibly make this decision. The fetus is not a person, according to Susan Sherwood. It is a biologically human entity only. Becomes a baby if she wants it to be a baby, but otherwise this is private, this is intimate, and you just can't go there. You just can't go there. Marianne Warren, what counts is a person. What counts is a person. You and I, that thing in the womb, the being in the womb, it's biologically human. Person. I mean, we all know what persons are. I mean, we've got 5 things here that Marianne Warren rightly says are extremely important. We've got consciousness, the idea of external events, internal being. You're all conscious here tonight, I hope. For anybody not conscious, let me know. Poke you a little. Hopefully you can feel pain. I hope you're not feeling pain at the moment, but hopefully you can feel pain. You have reasoning, the developed capacity to solve new and complex problems. Reasoning, self-motivated activity, the capacity to communicate, and self-awareness. Now, is anybody going to suggest here that these aren't important? These are the very definition of a person. Do you think that thing in the womb, that being in the womb, has any of these? That little thing the size of a dot at the end of a period in your computer, you think it's a person? There's no consciousness. There's no self-motivated activity. There's no ability to communicate at all. Certainly no self-awareness. How could it be a person? How could it be a person? Who are we kidding here? The being in the womb is not a person. It lacks the essential traits that you and I have. It lacks the essential traits that you and I have. It can't possibly be a person. It might be a potential person. The Supreme Court suggested it could be a potential to turn into a person, but it's certainly not a person at the beginning. She stated at least some of these are necessary, if not sufficient, criteria for personhood, which is necessary and sufficient for moral standing. Fetuses don't meet any of these criteria, so they cannot be persons and cannot have moral standing, and so abortion is acceptable. Now, I'm not sure teenagers have any of these characteristics either, but we'll get into that later. But this is reasonable on some level. You can understand this, because how are you going to define a person? Oh, this thing's a person. No consciousness, no reasoning, no self-motivated activity, can't communicate, it's not aware of itself. See, there's something here. You need to look at it, because it's a strong argument. This thing doesn't have any of these traits. Certainly early on, I mean, maybe you can argue later, it starts to have some self-awareness and some ability to feel pain, but certainly not in the first trimester, in the first weeks of pregnancy. Most abortions are done between 6 and 8 weeks. And you can be pretty sure that around 6 weeks, there's none of this going on. Michael Tooley joined her what counts as a person. The fetus has no sense of self and cannot claim a right to life. Cannot claim a right to life. And one of the ideas was that the idea that one of the main things about being a person is that you want to continue in existence. I mean, anybody here not want to continue in existence? Okay. You want to continue in existence. I mean, the very basic, at the very least, you want to continue in existence. Do you think the embryo wants to continue in existence? That has any sense of wanting? Any sense of wanting? All of the cerebral cortex things aren't even hooked up yet. Does it want anything? Or it just is? So he says it's not a person. There's a difference between being a human being and being a human person. Yeah, the being in the womb is a human being, but it's not a human person. It's not a human person. And only killing of persons is wrong. Killing the being in the womb by abortion is not killing a person, and therefore it's morally justified. These are the very definition of person, that we think that we're rational beings. Is that Aquinas? Or Aristotle, we're rational beings. Being in the womb is a rational being. It's not a rational being. You just go to Aristotle, Aquinas, a few others. It's not a rational being. Can't think. It's not doing math in there. It's not a rational being. It's not a rational being. Certainly in the early stages, it's pretty unconscious. Certainly right after conception. And you want to go right back to conception, you might say, okay, well, the fetus might be doing math, The embryo might be doing, might be doing algebra. The fetus, the embryo might be doing some early math, but the conceptus, first day conception, there's no rational thought going on there. It's not a person. It's not a person. Okay? Killing is only got to do with persons. That's what the Supreme Court said. It's not a person. We don't know what it is, the Supreme Court said, and we'll get to that on day 4. We don't know what it is, but we don't think it's a person anyway. So, so killing something that you don't think is a person is morally justified. And certainly killing something that's not a person is morally justified. Okay? So it's not a rational being. Go read your Aquinas. Go read your Aristotle. Persons are rational beings. Persons are rational beings. Not a rational being. Don't think. Doesn't even know it's there. It's asleep. It's unconscious. Hasn't woken up yet. It's not a person. What underlies the not a person argument is what's called the achievement argument, the achievement view. Being a person is an achievement. It's not guaranteed automatically by physical conception. It is achieved gradually. It's achieved when you get Warren's development of the 5 traits, you get your reasoning, you get your ability to communicate, your sense of self, your desire to continue in existence. That comes in gradually, little by little, from the conceptus to the embryo to the fetus. That comes in gradually. Comes in even more after birth. Okay? And Michael Tooley says it comes in gradually that we achieve a sense of self. In fact, you probably have more of a sense of self now than when you were 4, I hope. So, personhood is something that is achieved. It's not a given just because you happen to have some DNA, 46 chromosomes. Anything can have chromosomes, okay? That doesn't make you a person. Read your Aquinas, read your Aristotle. Go back to these guys. You're a rational being. This thing isn't a rational being. Rational beingness comes in gradually. Gradually. It's an achievement. It's not guaranteed by physical conception. Oh, and then there's another thing. There's what's called admission into the human community. This is very important. Years ago, did anyone ever remember that show, 8 is Enough? It was a wonderful sort of show of a family, a mixed family, had a pile of kids. And it was the first show ever that dealt with miscarriage. And it was very interesting to me at the time. I must have been about 14 or 15, when this young woman was newly married, and then she got pregnant, and the whole family was very excited about this baby. This was the first grandchild, and everybody started getting prepared for this baby. And then for the first time on, I believe, ever on TV, in a sitcom, the woman had a miscarriage, and the whole family was devastated. And there was this wonderful statement, which when I was 15, I thought was amazing. The young woman, the younger sister of the woman who had the miscarriage says to her mother, "When do you think a baby starts to exist? When do you think a baby in there starts to exist?" And the mother said, "I don't really know." This was in the 1970s, probably right sometime after Roe v. Wade. And the young woman said, "You know when I think a baby starts to exist? When the family starts to get excited. When grandma starts to knit booties. When you're welcomed into the human community. That's when the baby in the womb becomes a baby." And at 15, I thought, yeah, that's really profound. That's like really profound. At 15, I thought that was really profound. Well, Michael Tooley thinks it's still profound, okay? That you have to be welcomed into the human community. Now, I don't know what happens if, it's, 1840 and you're an African American and you're not welcomed into the human community. well, then you're not a person yet. Or if you're never welcomed into the human community, I mean, maybe the assumption here is that at birth, everybody is welcomed into the human community, but I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm not sure that that's the case. But you have to have admission into the human community. Everybody has to say everybody sort of has to agree that it's a baby. Everybody has to agree and want this baby to be part of the human community. Okay? The being in the womb is not a person, but rather it's a potential person, has the potential for becoming a person, but it's not actual. It's not actual. It must be actual to have worth and dignity. It must be actual to have worth and dignity. How are we doing on time? Take a break. Let's take a break for 5 minutes. And
Before you take a break, just in case people have to leave, or I just thought they need to know, how they can, Erin, how can they watch the talks if they miss any of these? There's a talk every night through Thursday night like this. How do they actually find it on the web?
Just by going to
YouTube.
and type in a single word, Holy Apostles EDU.
That's it.
Yes,
And they'll see it.
yes.
Even tomorrow, or if they leave it now, they'll see the rest of this talk if they want to. Oh, very good.
Right.
And as you know, originally we thought this would be like a one credit course, but that's too complicated. And so there's going to be a credential. If you go to the talks, you can get a credential. So do they have to sign up somewhere that, about that?
I know nothing. I'm not a rational creature.
Sebastian sent out an email about that.
Yeah.
And register.
Yeah, so it'll be on your email, Sebastian, how to get such a credential. Yes. Now, what I was noticing, which was fascinating to me, see, I've taught this book for many, many years, but the way she actually does it, acting out the pro-choice view, is like what St. Thomas Aquinas did. He would always first put the objections to what he thought first, all the reasons why someone didn't agree with him, and they said he did it better than the people who held these false views. He did so well, because she was doing this for a little while and just get sort of hypnotized and if she really believes this stuff.
The abortion summa here.
It's very effective.
Well, stretch for a few minutes and then we'll start back up as soon as Oh, I have the microphone, I have the power.
And I'm glad I'm with the children.
So I warned you that this would be a roller coaster. Get everybody back. So someone asked during the break, one of the questions was, if it's not a religious issue, you know, how do we get out there? How do we evangelize on this issue? And it's always, first of all, the couch non-religious issues. You know, as Catholics, we're also against human trafficking of women and children. We're against rape, we're against poverty, we're against slavery that still exists in plenty of places in the world, and we're also against abortion. None of them are religious issues. Nobody sees the other four as religious issues. Nobody sees rape as a religious issue. Nobody sees the beheading of children, being against the beheading of children as a religious issue. Nobody sees being against trafficking of women and children as a religious issue. All of a sudden abortion is a religious issue. Like, no, it's a human rights issue, just like the others are. You don't want to ever let anybody, you know, put you into that pocket, pigeonhole you into that religious pocket, because it's over and done with. So the best thing to do is couch it with, you think abortion is a religious issue? Well, what about these other civil rights issues that the Catholics are also against? You know, Catholics are against the beheading of children. Oh, that's a religious issue. Like, who's going to say that? Catholics are against trafficking of women and children. Oh, that's a religious issue. Nobody says that. They're using it only in this one case. It's the only place you hear it. And you've got to be as shrewd and as clever and as wise as the children of this world and say, oh, wait a minute, nice try. Well, let's take a look at these other things and say, why is this a religious issue? Not a religious issue. Not a religious issue. I need to be Catholic to know that beheading children is wrong. Doesn't matter where those children happen to be. I mean, it doesn't matter where those children happen to be. Beheading children is wrong. Anywhere. Right? Is that a religious issue? Why is beheading children a religious issue? Oh, you behead your children in the womb, it's a religious issue. Hello? It's like, no, don't let anyone get away with that. It's a human rights issue. So let's get back here. So when does the being in the womb become a person? Okay, and there's a lot of different answers to this question. Sometime before birth, depending on brain development. One group is going to say at birth. At birth, Marion Warren, Roe v. Wade, admission into the human community. Admission into the human community. The Supreme Court said at birth. That's when you get admitted into the human community. I mean, I don't know if everyone here is a citizen of the United States. Did you ever think about how you became a citizen if you were born here? How did you become a citizen? You stuck your head out and you took one breath. You were immediately a citizen. I mean, you maybe never thought of it. You have to take that one breath. You stick your head out and you're still born, you're not a citizen. I don't know if you didn't know that, if you ever knew that. You give birth to a stillborn child and they don't take one breath. They're not a citizen, they're not a tax exemption. They take one breath and then they die, citizen, tax exemption. You need one breath. Somewhere in the Roe v. Wade details of things, someone put one breath, you need one breath. That's how you became a citizen. It's an amazing thing. At birth, that's when you got your admission into the human community. Now there was a problem a while back with babies that survived abortion. And so we had the Born Alive Protection Act. The Born Alive, because there was the idea, well, they were supposed to be aborted, but they survived, they took one breath. Now they're American citizens, like, can we throw them in a garbage pail, or do we have to send them to the hospital? Like, it sort of seemed like a gray area, because the idea was, well, we planned on abortion, but the kid took a breath, And now what are we going to do? And we found out that hospitals were saying, well, American citizen or not, we're dumping you in a garbage pail. Okay, because the intention was abortion before you were born, before you became an American citizen. So we're just going to kind of squeak it through. But normal sort of decent people didn't like hearing about that. And so we came up with this Born Alive Protection Act, which every senator, even Hillary Clinton, agreed with. Every senator except one agreed with the Born Alive Protection Act. Okay? Only one didn't.
What was it?
Barack Obama.
That would be Barack Obama.
That's Barack Obama.
Yes, he did not agree. He was the only person who did, the only senator who did not sign the Born Alive Protection Act. So at birth is admission into the human community. And then there's after birth. Michael Tooley, Peter Singer. Now Tooley's early position was 1 month after birth. You do not become a person until 1 month after birth. You seem to think that some of those things, like, baby starts to smile around 1 month, so maybe there's somebody there, there's somebody home. Okay, so there might be some kind of rational something going on at 1 month. So his early position was 1 month, but he changed that later and he said 3 months. I guess he did a little research, hung out with some babies that had been born, and came to the conclusion that, well, they were persons at birth, but at 3 months, when they start maybe looking around and really following things, so he took that later position, 3 months. And then Peter Singer, I love Peter Singer. I love Tooley and Peter Singer. Peter Singer says sometime in the first 3 years, they become persons. You became a person sometime in the first 3 years. I mean, come on, how many of you remember anything before the first 3 years? Do you remember, maybe you became a person a little earlier than the rest of us. Most people don't remember anything before the first 3 years. You're a blob. You're a blob before the first 3 years. Now, I'm going to tell you what I love about Peter Singer is they're consistent. They say it's not a person before birth. It's not a person after birth. What do you think? Sticking your head out of your mother's womb turned you into a person? Like, who believes that? Well, besides the Supreme Court. Who believes that you're inside your mother's womb, and then you pop outside, and this popping out, however long it happened to take, this popping out turns you into a person? That's what the Supreme Court said. I mean, think about it. This passage through the womb and out turned you into a person. You're not a person inside, but 9 adult Supreme Court justices said this process, this journey out, turned you from a non-person, from a plant, into a person. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. But Tooley and Singer say that's a bunch of crap. That's nuts. You got to give them credit. You got to give Tooley and Peter Singer credit. They recognized that that was craziness. Who the heck thinks that the journey out of the womb into a person? They said, no, that's crazy. That doesn't work. It's not a person beforehand, and after birth, it's not a person either. And it's great consistency. At least it's logical. At least it's logical. You got to give these guys credit. It's very logical. Of course, being born doesn't turn a plant into a person. And Peter Singer says it's sometime in the first 3 years. The kid starts to shape up or something. He never exactly says what happens, but he thinks that something happens in the first 3 years. So here we have the ethical versus the legal, and I think this is important. Peter Singer, and I'll read this quote here. It would, of course, be difficult to say at what age children begin to see themselves as distinct entities existing over time. So there's that idea of wanting to continue in existence. You have to see yourself as a distinct entity existing over time. Even when we talk with 2- and 3-year-old children, it is usually very difficult to elicit any coherent conception of death or the possibility that someone, let alone the child herself, might cease to exist. Of course, where rights are at risk, we err on the side of safety. There is some plausibility in the view that, for legal purposes, since birth provides the only sharp, clear, and easily understood line, the law of homicide should continue to apply immediately after birth. So he kind of goes back to the birth idea on the legal thing. but ethically he doesn't. So why he kind of goes back to this on the legal issue, he never really clearly says if it's not a person, except that he seems to think it's a sharp, clear, maybe it's the easily understood line. And the Supreme Court said that, so maybe he just wants to be in agreement with that. Okay, Judith Jarvis Thompson, she's pro-choice. It's very pro-choice. And as I put down here, her violinist argument is the most copied and most referenced abortion article ever written. See it everywhere. And surprisingly, Judith Jarvis Thompson says, all of this not a person stuff is baloney. The being in the womb, embryo, the fetus, call it, of course it's a person. Of course it's a person. Who are we kidding? Of course it's a person. It comes out a person. So she agrees, she's very consistent too, just like Peter said. She says, yeah, the process of birth doesn't turn a plant into a person. Of course it's a person all along. But the woman has no duty to sustain. The woman has no duty to sustain the being in the womb. And she gives us what's called the violinist argument. And the violinist argument basically goes like this. You wake up one morning, somebody kidnaps you and knocks you out, and you wake up attached to a famous, not just any old violinist, mind you, a famous violinist. What's his name there? Wawa, I can't think of his name. Who's the famous violinist we all love? Yeah, that's a good one. Yo-yo. I was thinking Wawa. Yo-yo. Yeah, you're attached to yo. You're attached to yo-yo. Yo-yo Ma, right? Yeah, she's a child. Not close enough. Violinist child. Close enough. So you're attached to this famous violinist. Don't tell Yo-yo. I thought he was a violinist. And his life depends on being attached to you. You got tubes running back and forth between you, and somebody says, in order to save his life, you're going to be hooked up to this guy for 9 months here. It's like, excuse me? Like, I didn't plan on this. This wasn't my idea. Now, she'll grant you, it's nice. Kind of decent of you. It's nice if you stay hooked up, let the violinist stay hooked up to you and get his sustenance from you or whatever it is he's getting to stay alive. It's very nice. But you surely don't have a duty to do that. You don't have a duty to stay hooked up to the violinist. You can unhook the violinist and get on with your life. You can unhook. You do not owe sustenance to another human being. You are your own person. You can't just have somebody hook themselves up to you like they own you. You owe them no sustenance. You have no duty to do that. No duty to sustain him. You can pull the plug. If he dies, it's too bad. We feel bad. Good violinist, like the guy. Didn't have any hard feelings, but it's not your concern. And then we have what's called the justified forcing principle. There's no duty to sustain, so you can't force me to stay hooked up to the violinist. If there's not a duty to do something, you can't force me to do it. If I have a duty to do something, like I have a duty to stop at a stop sign, well, then you can force me to stop at a sign. But if I have no duty to do something, I have no duty to give you $5. So if I'm walking down the street, you can't force me to give you $5. So I don't have a duty. It's a no forcing principle. I didn't have to get hooked up to this guy. And it's nice if I do, but I don't have any duty to sustain him. He has no right to use your body to receive sustenance. And if you stay plugged in, it's a kindness, but not a duty. It's a kindness, but not a duty. So this obviously carries over the duty to sustain argument. The woman carrying a child is providing him or her with sustenance. With sustenance. It's a child. She doesn't question that. It's a person. But the woman is providing sustenance, and she has no duty to do this, so no one may force her to do this. It's the non-forcing principle. She may at any time cease to do this. She may withdraw her support and expel the child. The child has no intrinsic right to be using another person's body for sustenance. The child has no intrinsic right, no right to use the woman's body for sustenance. Abortion is the expelling of an intruder. Picture you're in your house, you have a nice house, and somebody comes in and they just start chowing down on the food in your refrigerator. It's like, excuse me, get out, this is my house. You can't just start eating my food. This is my house, my refrigerator, I bought the stuff. It's too bad you're hungry. This is my house. You can't just walk into, you think, anybody here think they can just walk into somebody's house and start eating their food? Is there anyone here that has ever just walked into somebody's house down the street here if the cafeteria wasn't open? Start eating somebody's food? Like, if you do that, what do you expect to happen? You're going to get thrown out. You know that. You're going to get thrown out. You don't have the right to walk into somebody's house here in Cromwell and start eating food out of the refrigerator if you don't like the cafeteria food. You're going to get thrown out, and they have every right to throw you out. So, kid shows up in the woman's body, and now it wants to eat. It's like, no, she doesn't want him in there. She can throw him out. You can cut your ties to an uninvited intruder, an uninvited guest. It's your house. Throw him out. Makes perfect sense. You don't have a duty to start feeding people that show up. Now, a lot of people wanted to say that the violinist argument, well, that sort of applies in the case of rape, where the idea is this is an uninvited guest that showed up. But Judith Jarvis says, oh no, the violinist applies in all cases. The woman never has a duty to sustain the child. The woman always has the right to withhold or withdraw sustenance, and the child never has the right to be given sustenance. Your right to life does not depend on whether or not you're the product of rape. In utero, you never have a right to life because you're using somebody else for sustenance. So you break into somebody's house, well, you don't have a right to be there. So you're an intruder or an unwelcome guest. So the intruder breaks into your house, compare that to rape, you have every right to expel somebody. You break into my house, you start eating my food, I'm going to tell you, get out. Get out. You have no right to be here. But it goes on. Let's say you take precautions. I keep my doors locked. I take precautions to keep the intruder out. Contraception. If I lock my doors, but somehow he gets in through the back door, I don't really care how he gets in. He still can't eat my food. It's my house. It's my food. Get out. That's my right. Somebody comes into your house, invited or uninvited. But let's say you invite somebody in. You say, Joe, hey, come on over, have a pizza with me. So, Joe comes over, starts eating your pizza. Now he's been there for a week or two. And all of a sudden it dawns on you, I don't really like sharing my pizza with Joe. Well, Joe could say, well, you invited me over. Well, yeah, so what? So what? You invite Joe over, he hangs out for a while, and now you change your mind. You change your mind. You don't want Joe there anymore eating your pizza. Get out. It's my house. My food, my pizza. Get out. It's as simple as that. So even if you choose to be pregnant, you invited Joe over. You chose it. You can change your mind. It's your body. It's your house. It's your refrigerator. You don't have to keep feeding Joe. You have every right to change your mind. The child is an intruder or an unwelcome guest, or has become an unwelcome guest after a month or 2 months or 3 months or 8 months. Throw him out. You can expel him at any time. That's very interesting. She has a little sub-note that she puts. She does say it would be indecent to do so late in pregnancy to go to Europe. Okay, she does have that little disclaimer that if a woman, say in the 8th month of pregnancy, decided she had a chance at a nice trip to Europe, and the pregnant, she doesn't, who wants to be pregnant when you're traveling through Europe? I mean, does anybody here want to be pregnant traveling through Europe? Okay, you know, but she says it'd be a good idea to hold off on the trip and have the baby. Okay, it's kind of indecent to have an abortion late in pregnancy. But other than that, if you have some other reason for wanting it out, it's an intruder. It's an unwelcome guest. You have no duty to sustain people that are hanging out in your house. There's the door. Please leave. Now, Planned Parenthood tells us about the gentle, what I call the gentle riddance of the intruder. The gentle riddance of the intruder. So most abortions are aspiration abortions, and this is the basic idea of how they're done. So, I mean, you don't have to be rude when you throw the intruder out, okay? We can do this gently, okay? We're gonna do this gently. You can be nice about it when you throw Joe out of your house. So your healthcare provider, this is from Planned Parenthood, and this is their description of abortion. Your healthcare provider will examine your uterus, the woman's uterus. She'll get medication for pain, be offered sedation. And then the cervix is opened and stretched with dilators. You're given antibiotics to prevent infection. And then a tube is inserted through the cervix into the uterus, and a handheld suction device or a suction machine gently empties the uterus. It's gentle, okay? And Planned Parenthood wants you to know this. It is gentle, okay? So make no mistake about it. When you decide you've had it with Joe in your house, you're going to gently send him on his way, okay? Now, sometimes an instrument called a curette is used to remove any remaining tissue that lines the uterus. It may also be used to check that the uterus is empty, and if a curette is used, people often call the abortion a DNC, or a dilation and curettage. And it only takes 5 to 10 minutes with about an hour recovery. So you have this gentle thing going on, and it's important to know that. Planned Parenthood wants to make sure that you understand that there's nothing harsh about abortion. It simply gently enters the uterus. And those are the abortions that are generally done between around 6 to 8 weeks. And then their second one is the dilation and evacuation. Again, you've got the checking and the medication for pain and the stretching open of the cervix. You're given antibiotics for infection. And in later second trimester procedures, you may also need a shot through your abdomen to make sure that the fetus's heart stops before the procedure begins. And then your healthcare provider will inject a numbing medication into or near the cervix, and then they turn on the suction machine, and again, you have the gentle emptying of the uterus. So things are done carefully and safely, and you get Joe out of your house. You don't have to share anything with Joe. You have the gentle thing happening here. And this procedure takes 10 to 20 minutes, takes a little bit longer to prepare your cervix. Cervix is really tight shut. It's like a vice that holds the baby in. So you've got the uterus, baby being in the womb, fetus, whatever you want to call it. It's in there, and where it generally comes out through the pregnancy, that's like a vice grip. It's like a vice grip to hold everything in there. So they're going to insert things in there and stretch that open, and then gently everything is taken out. So I want to look a little bit clearly here at utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. The greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. And Peter Singer says, when the life of an infant will be so miserable as not to be worth living, from the internal perspective of the being whom will lead that life. So from the internal perspective of the being in the womb, If there are no intrinsic reasons for keeping the infant alive, like the feelings of the parents, it is better that the child should be helped to die without further suffering. Okay, the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. So if for some reason the child, and he's using the term child or infant, this is where he carries it over outside of birth, but even inside, so abortion or infanticide, we want to keep everybody happy. I mean, that's an important thing. Happiness is an important thing. Just go back to Aristotle and Aquinas. Happiness is important. And Peter Singer absolutely agrees with that. And when the life of an infant will be so miserable as to be not worth living from its point of view, well, you should look at somebody else's point of view for a change if you're pro-life. You know, look at somebody else's point of view. Just don't look at your own point of view. Look at the point of view of the being in the womb. And if there's some situation where it's not wanted, or it's sick, or it's got some problem, you should look at it from its point of view and realize that it wouldn't want to live, that it wouldn't want to live. And it should be helped to die without further suffering. So what counts? What counts is not just life. I mean, yeah, you know, you're pro-life. Yeah, life. Well, how about some quality of life? You know, it's great to just talk life. But come on, let's be real. What really matters is quality of life. Quality, what, do you want to have a crappy life? I mean, who says, I want to have a lousy life? I want to have a poor, miserable, sick, I want to be in pain. Like, when was the last time you said, I want to be in pain and I want to have a lousy, unhappy life? I mean, have you ever said that? So come on, get real. You don't really care about life. What we really care about as human beings is quality of life. What quality of life? And who are you to force a horrible, miserable existence on this poor, helpless little child? Take a look, you know, wake up, smell the roses here. What counts, what is important is not just life, but quality of life for both the woman and the child. What matters is how you live, that you're happy, that life is meaningful, that it's free of pain and suffering, free of disability. I had the flu last week for 24 hours. I wanted to die. It's like it was horrible. I thought, how do people in chronic pain do this? Like, you know, it was terrible. Just from the flu. And you want to inflict a life of the flu on some person? You can see they're sick, or they're in poverty, or they're unwanted. And you want to inflict, oh, that's nice. You know, yeah. You know, you're pro-life, you're well-fed, you probably came from a nice family, you're well-educated, you're in a nice religious order. Like, oh yeah, look at your life. Your life is great. Your life is great. But this kid, this sick kid, or in this poverty-ridden mess, you want to bring that child into the world and force them to live a life of suffering and pain and misery? Well, that's great from your get up on your high horse there. But, you know, come on, get off your high horse and look at the reality. Yeah, what's important is happy, meaningful, free of pain and suffering life. That's what's a good. That's what's a good. Just life, not just life. An unwanted pregnancy is an unwanted child, and an unwanted child is unhappiness. And we don't need any more unhappiness in the world. I mean, look around at all the suffering. You want to add more suffering to the world? You know, like, isn't there enough suffering? Isn't there enough suffering? You want to add more suffering. You want this poor little child to come into the world and live a life of suffering. It's like, hello, when the life of an infant will be so miserable as to be not worth living, and can't you see that? You're rational beings. You can see this is not a life you would choose. So from the internal perspective of the being who will lead that life, help to die without further suffering. Utilitarianism. Greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. Hope you're not against happiness. It's better to have no life than poor quality of life. It's better to have no life than a poor quality of life. It's better to have no life for the child than a poor quality of life for the woman. So better no life for the child. Do you know how miserable this child is going to be if she has to carry this pregnancy to term? Had a young woman who came to us years ago, and she said she had a beautiful little boy, and she said, I just cannot have another child right now. She said, I just cannot carry this pregnancy to term. My husband is, working 80 hours a week. We have no money. I just can't handle another child right now. I'm exhausted. This is just not good. Better no life for this child than that my life gets any more exhausted than it already is. And better no life for the child himself than poor quality of life. For the kid himself. It's not just the woman. Yeah, we want her to have quality of life. We want her to have a quality of life. But do you really want to bring a child into a bad situation? I mean, look around the world. Take a trip to India or to Haiti. You want to see bad situations, little children living on the side of the road. You want that woman to have another little child living on the side of the road? Better no life for the child and poor quality of life for the whole world. Do you like looking at all this suffering in the world? Does this make you feel good? It's like we all want happiness. And the more that children are born into these horrible situations, it gets worse for the women, it gets worse for the kid himself, it gets worse for all of us. It gets worse for all of us. We want the greatest amount of happiness for the most number of people. Is that a bad objective? Is that a bad goal? Seems like a pretty decent goal to me. Want the most amount of happiness for the most number of people. Isn't that what all of us strive for all the time? To try to take people out of suffering, out of poverty? That's what we all work towards. All the time with our acts of charity. We want the greatest amount of happiness for the most number of people. And abortion helps you get that. It gets the kid out of the misery. It helps the woman not have another mouth to feed, and the whole world is helped by it. The whole world is helped by it. Utilitarianism. It's a noble goal, the greatest amount of happiness for the most number of people. And every child should be a wanted child. Every child should be a wanted child. I mean, who would want to be an unwanted child? I mean, would you like to be? If you were an unwanted child, I'm sure you're not too happy about the thought of it. And if you weren't an unwanted child, well, you're pretty snug and secure in the fact that you were a wanted child. And most of you look pretty healthy here in this room. So every child should be a wanted child. That's a right. That's a right that you're wanted. That's a right of a child. A child should be wanted by its mother at least, and hopefully by its mother and father. I mean, who would say that a child shouldn't be wanted? Children should be wanted. That's a goal we should all have. Children should be wanted, and children should be healthy. I mean, are you going to say you think children shouldn't be healthy? Children should be wanted, and children should be healthy. And an unwanted pregnancy is an unwanted child. And an unwanted or an unhealthy pregnancy, unhealthy fetus, is an unhappy child. And both of these are terrible situations. And abortion gets rid of this situation. Abortion gets rid of this situation. What do you want, a lot of unhealthy, unhappy children, babies running around, being abused, they're not wanted? Like, is that what you want? Of course not. Nobody wants that. So, to ensure that every individual has the knowledge, opportunity, and freedom to make every child a wanted child and every family a healthy family. Planned Parenthood's mission statement to ensure that every individual has the knowledge, opportunity, and freedom to make every child a wanted child and every family a happy family. Okay, you're going to disagree with that. That's a noble statement. That's a noble statement. And abortion helps with this. Abortion helps with it. Just a logical argument. Happiness is important. Health is important. I want to talk just briefly before we end tonight about the latest book that's out on abortion, and it's called Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, because apparently that the pro-choice side seems to be a little concerned that things are falling apart a bit. And Katha Pollitt says she likes the idea that abortion is a private medical decision, but she says it's also a necessary public good. Now, in the past, the pro-choice side has always kind of expressed the idea that abortion is sort of the lesser of two evils. It's not a good, but it's sort of a necessary evil. It's a necessary evil. But that sort of framework is shifting. That framework is shifting. It's time where people realize it's not a necessary evil. It's a good. Now picture it like this. Picture there's a whole bunch of people out here that have cavities. They all have cavities, and they need to have their teeth filled. So we're going to dig out the cavities, and we're going to fill their teeth. That's a good. That's a good, taking care of people's cavities. Okay? That's a good. So abortion is a private medical decision, but it's a necessary good. We should accept that it's good for everyone if women only have the children they want and can raise well. Only have the children they want and can raise well. And Katha Pollitt considers Hillary Clinton way, way, way too pro-life. Okay, way, way, way too pro-life. Talk about it a little bit later, but I'm going to bring it up early now. Hillary Clinton, as a strong pro-choice person, wants abortion to be safe, legal, and I don't want it to be rare. If you have a whole bunch of people out here with cavities, do you want digging those cavities out and filling them to be rare? Or do you want everybody to get their teeth filled and fixed? Well, if there's a medical problem and you can fix it, why would you want it, and there's nothing wrong with it, why would you want it to be rare? Why would you want it to be rare? Abortion is a good. It's not a necessary evil, it's a good. We don't want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare in this country. We want abortion to be safe, legal, and lots of them for everybody that needs them. Lots of them for everybody that needs them, because abortion is not a necessary evil. Abortion is a good. So this is a shift to some extent in the pro-choice side of things. Is that our last slide for tonight? Yep. Tomorrow night, I promise you, lots of pro-life. But why don't we do some questions? Yes.
I always had a hard time understanding the citizen gets the protection. If illegal comes over or from another country, they're not citizen, but they are entitled protection.
Right.
So I don't understand the citizen protection concept.
As opposed to the non-citizen,
Mm-hmm.
or as opposed to the preborn?
The preborn.
The preborn are not, first of all, the Supreme Court said we don't know that they're persons.
Mm.
So we're not going to make citizens out of creatures that we don't even know are persons in the first place. And then they made it very specific. You become a citizen by taking a breath. And, kid coming across the border is breathing. So they've got some rights as persons. We're pretty sure they're persons. But the being in the womb, a lot of questions there. A lot of questions. There's a lot of doubts. The Supreme Court, we're going to get a lot into the legal, but the Supreme Court says, we really don't know what this thing is. I mean, the Supreme Court never said we know what the being in the womb is. The Supreme Court said exactly that. We don't know. We don't know what it is. So since we don't know, we're going to assume it's not a person. We're going to assume it's not a person. Yes?
So is it safe to say that the majority of pro-choice people believe that, just what you say, that they're not certain about the personhood of the being in the womb?
I think there's been a shift in the last 30 years. I think the first 10 years after Roe v. Wade, the basic line, or the first 20 years, let's say, the idea was it's not a person. It's becoming difficult now with the sonograms. I mean, on Facebook, people, you have a sonogram and they've already named the baby and they know what sex the baby is, and they're already sending out 3D images that tend not to look like blobs of tissue. They seem to have these blobs of tissues have faces and seem to be moving around. And so it's becoming more difficult to say it's not a person. Well, it was very interesting at the Life and Choice Conference. Like I said, the pro-choice people didn't want to go anywhere near abortion after 20 weeks. So there's a lot more agreement between pro-life and pro-choice than people realize. It's certainly, at least in the moral realm. The legal is another story. So, but things are shifting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens because, as we'll talk later, the Supreme Court decision really depends on it not being a person. Yes.
What is the pro-choice discussion point for the double victim, the double murder argument of the killing of a pregnant woman and the charging of double murder in many states?
Well, Kiki's attorney, so I probably should close, or if people want to stay, if you have the time.
Okay, if anyone who needs to leave, you want to do that?
I think if we keep it 6:30 to 8:30,
Okay.
I think we can have more.
You mean the life of the mother situation?
No, actually, if a pregnant woman is murdered, and,
Oh, okay, yeah.
many times the perpetrator is charged with 2 counts of killing 2 individuals.
Some of the problem is that it's got to do with being welcomed into the human community. If she thinks it's a baby and she wanted to carry that pregnancy term and grandma's home knitting booties and the nursery's set up and then somebody murders her, well, the child is kind of already welcomed into the human community. A lot of the books, a lot of the laws on the books are very mixed. They're not in, they don't go along with each other. So you've got Roe v. Wade, but then you've got the double murder thing like we saw out in California with the Peterson 10 years ago. So that is a problem. But I think part of what's happening there is the woman wanted the baby. Now, I think it's in Illinois, if a woman is driving on her way to an abortion clinic and a car hits her and they both die, they're charged with 2 counts of homicide, 2 counts of vehicular homicide, even if she's on her way to the abortion clinic. So there's a case where you've got 2 laws that will be totally opposed to each other legally. Yeah, yes.
So what's the pro-choice rationale for selective reductions?
It's the same thing.
Huh?
First of all, it's not a person. You're just plucking out plants.
Right.
So how many of you have ever had a garden? And you put in a row of radishes, right?
Yeah.
You put in 500 radishes, but the row really is only good for 100, so you pluck out 400 radishes. Just radishes.
Okay.
So it's not a person. So you can have selective reduction. You get 5 in there and you realize you can really only want 2. You pluck out 3. They're not persons, they're plants. They're biologically human, but there's nobody home. There's no spirit, there's no mind, there's no rational being. They're nobody's home. So you're just plucking out bodies.
Okay.
You're just plucking out little zombies. There's nobody home. So it's no problem.
What about sex reduction?
What's that?
Choosing the selection.
It's the
Same thing.
You're just picking and choosing whether you want a geranium or a petunia.
Yep.
Yeah. It's just that. There's nobody there.
Okay.
Take another roller coaster ride. I hope most of you
Okay.
can come back.
So-
This is the whole package. It's tough to, just
Okay.
give you a little tough to start tonight. But thank you very much. And I'm available for questions.